The twin suns of Prime sank behind the golden towers of the capital city, throwing long shadows across the shining crystal streets. Inside the high palace of the Zalari Empire, silence stretched across the grand halls. The air itself felt heavy, as though the weight of grief pressed down on every citizen who passed beneath the palace gates. At the heart of the palace sat Queen Saralith, ruler of the Zalari, a people known throughout the galaxy for their proud traditions, unmatched technology and warrior spirit. She was tall, her form wrapped in flowing garments woven from threads that shimmered like living light. Her crown, a circlet of crystalline shards, glowed faintly as though alive. Yet for all her strength, for all her authority, her face showed a pain no crown could hide. Her son, the young prince, her only child, was missing. 2 weeks had passed since the disastrous raid. The queen had replayed the reports 1,000 times in her mind. The prince had been traveling to the border colonies, escorted by a fleet of guards and ships. Then, without warning, raiders descended from the void. They were fast, ruthless, and cunning, striking with precision and disappearing into the dark corners of space. The fleet was shattered. Survivors reported that the raiders had taken prisoners before vanishing. Among those taken was the young prince. From that day forward, the palace had fallen into mourning. Black banners of sorrow draped across its towers. Courtiers walked quietly, afraid to speak too loudly in the presence of their queen. And Queen Saralith herself, once unshakable in the eyes of her people, now stood on the edge of despair. Every day she entered the Chamber of Stars, a vast hall where the ceiling projected the living map of their galaxy. She stood beneath those shifting lights, searching the spiral arms of the cosmos as though her gaze alone might pierce the shadows and find her son. But the stars gave her no answers. Her council of advisors, though loyal, spoke in hushed tones of the truth they feared to voice. The prince was gone forever. The raiders rarely left captives alive. If he lived, it would only be as a bargaining tool in some cruel scheme. And if he did not, then the throne of Zalor stood in jeopardy. For without an heir, rival factions would rise, and enemies beyond their borders would sense weakness. But more than her throne, more than her empire, it was her heart that ached. A mother's heart. She had raised the boy herself, guided his first steps, taught him the traditions of their people, watched him laugh beneath the starlight of their gardens. The thought of never hearing his voice again, never feeling his small hands cling to her robes, filled her with a sorrow deeper than any battlefield wound, and so, on the 15th day of her mourning, she stood once again in the Chamber of Stars, staring upward as though the stars might give her a miracle. It was then the great doors of the hall opened, and footsteps echoed across the polished crystal floor. It was Captain Daniel Rhodes, a human soldier. Among the Zalari, humans were still seen as curious creatures, physically weaker, shorter-lived, lacking the advanced biology of the great galactic races. But Daniel had earned respect among many for his calm nature and steady courage. He had served as a tactical advisor during border conflicts, where his unorthodox strategies had saved thousands of lives. Some called him reckless, others called him clever, but no one could deny that he was brave. Now he approached the queen, bowing low in respect. His armor was simple compared to the shining plates of the Zalari guards, yet it bore the scars of many battles. "Your Majesty," Daniel said softly, his voice echoing in the vast hall, "I have come to offer my service." The queen turned her eyes upon him, weary but still sharp. "Service?" she asked. "What service could you give that my entire empire cannot?" Daniel did not flinch at her tone. He knew her grief spoke louder than her words. "I have heard the whispers," he said. "The council believes your son is lost beyond reach, but I do not believe it. I believe he lives, and I will find him." The hall grew silent. Even the guards standing at the doors shifted uneasily, their jeweled spears glinting. To suggest such a thing was madness. The raiders who had taken the prince were known to vanish into uncharted space. Entire fleets had failed to track them before. The queen studied him for a long moment. Her voice, when it came, trembled with both anger and sorrow. "Do you think I have not sent my finest?" she demanded. "Do you think I have not scoured every system, turned every stone, questioned every scout? My fleets have searched, my soldiers have bled, my people have prayed, and still he is gone. What hope can you, a lone human, possibly offer me?" Daniel met her gaze without fear. His eyes were steady, his voice calm. "Because I am not like your soldiers," he said. "They rely on strength, on numbers, on power. But the raiders expect that. They know how to fight armies. What they do not expect is someone like me. I will not fight them as an army. I will hunt them as one man, silent, patient, and determined. And I will not stop until I bring your son home." The queen's lips parted, but no words came. For a moment her sorrow faltered beneath the quiet fire of his determination. "You speak as though it were simple," she whispered at last. "It is not simple," Daniel replied. "It is dangerous. I may fail. I may not return. But if I do nothing, then your son is truly lost. At least if I try, there is a chance." The hall remained silent. The only sound the slow beating of the queen's heart in her chest. Her eyes lowered to the floor, and for the first time in many days she felt a spark of something she had nearly forgotten. Hope. Finally she raised her hand. "Then go," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "Go, human soldier. Find my child, and if you return with him, the gratitude of a queen will be yours. But more than that, you will have saved a mother's heart." Daniel bowed deeply. "I will bring him back," he promised. As he turned and walked out of the chamber of stars, the queen watched him go. Alone, one human against the vast darkness of space, it seemed impossible. Yet something in her soul whispered that perhaps, just perhaps, the impossible might be done. And so the story began, of a queen's despair and a human's vow, a tale that would echo across the galaxy for generations to come. The next morning, the palace gates opened for the human soldier. Captain Daniel Rhodes stood ready, carrying only what he needed. He wore plain armor, light enough for speed but strong enough to protect him from sudden danger. A blaster rested on his side, but more important than his weapon were the tools strapped to his belt: a small scanner, a translator chip, and a set of old-fashioned survival gear that most modern soldiers laughed at. Daniel did not laugh. He trusted these simple tools more than the most advanced alien devices. As he prepared to leave, the Queen's advisors gathered in the hall. They whispered in disbelief. "Foolish," said one, shaking his head. "One man against the raiders? He will not survive a single encounter." "Perhaps that is his wish," another replied coldly. "Better to die with courage than wait here in silence." But Queen Sarilith remained silent. She only watched as Daniel bowed to her once again. Her eyes were tired, yet in their depths a faint spark glimmered, a spark of fragile hope. "Find my son," she whispered. "I will," Daniel said, and then he turned and stepped into the rising suns of GalacticPrime. The trail of shadows, Daniel's first step was not to follow the raiders directly. That would have been suicide. Instead, he traveled to the border stations where survivors of the attack had been brought. At the largest outpost, a vast ring-shaped station orbiting a dying star, Daniel walked through dim corridors filled with soldiers, traders, and refugees. He sought out a Zalari pilot who had survived the ambush. The pilot's ship had been badly damaged and half his crew had been lost. His eyes were haunted, his voice heavy with guilt. "They came out of the void like ghosts," the pilot said. "We were surrounded before we could raise shields. They didn't kill us all at once, they chose who to take." Daniel leaned forward. "Why would they take prisoners?" The pilot shook his head. "I do not know. But I saw them drag the prince onto their ship. He was alive then. After that, we could do nothing. Their engines were too fast. They vanished into the dark sectors." "Which direction?" Daniel pressed. The pilot pointed to a star map projected above the table. His finger rested on a cluster of stars known as the Rift Zone, a lawless region filled with smugglers, criminals, and forgotten worlds. Few dared to enter. "That is where they fled," the pilot said quietly. "But be warned, human. Many have gone into the Rift Zone. Few return." Daniel only nodded. "Then I will be one of the few." Among strangers to enter the Rift Zone, Daniel could not simply fly under the banners of the Zalari Empire. That would draw the attention of every pirate in the region. So he disguised his ship. He stripped away its bright markings, painted its hull black, and adjusted its transponder to mimic the signals of a merchant freighter. His journey was long. He passed through systems where suns burned weakly, their planets reduced to rubble by ancient wars. He stopped at hidden stations where smugglers traded goods, where credits were exchanged for silence, and where the law of the strongest ruled. At every stop, Daniel listened. He asked quiet questions, bought drinks for weary traders, and offered help where others would not. Slowly, piece by piece, he built a trail. The raiders who had taken the prince were not random bandits. They were part of a larger network, one that trafficked in lives. Children, nobles, even soldiers captured in battle. All were sold to the highest bidder. Daniel's fists tightened each time he heard such things. But he kept his anger inside. Anger would not bring the boy back. Patience would. The Cantina encounter on the world of Veyros, a dusty planet of endless deserts. Daniel entered a crowded cantina. Smoke hung in the air, and dozens of alien voices filled the space. He sat at a corner table, scanning the room. Somewhere in this place was the clue he needed. A hooded figure approached and sat across from him. "You're looking for something," the stranger said. Daniel met his eyes. "Information. About a child taken by raiders," the stranger chuckled. "Many children are taken. Why should this one matter?" "Because he is still alive," Daniel said firmly. "And because I will not stop until I find him." The stranger studied him for a moment, then leaned closer. "There is a fortress, a hidden base in the Rift Zone. Few know its location, but I have heard whispers. The raiders keep their most valuable captives there." Daniel's pulse quickened. "Where?" The stranger smiled faintly. "Information is not free, human." Daniel placed a small pouch of credits on the table. "This is all I have." The stranger weighed the pouch, then nodded. He tapped coordinates into Daniel's datapad. "Go there. But beware. If the child is there, he will be guarded well. You may find more than you seek." And just as suddenly as he had appeared, the stranger slipped back into the crowd and vanished. Test of survival. The journey to the fortress was perilous. The Rift Zone was filled with dangers. Asteroid fields that shifted unpredictably, ion storms that fried navigation systems, and patrols of pirate ships hunting for easy prey. At one point, Daniel's ship was intercepted by 2 raider vessels. They hailed him, demanding he surrender his cargo. Daniel replied calmly, "I have nothing of value, only scrap and fuel." The raiders were not convinced. They attacked. Daniel's ship was smaller and slower, but he used his wits. He lured them into a dense asteroid cluster, weaving through rocks while the raiders chased recklessly. At the last moment, he triggered his ship's decoy flares, confusing their sensors. One raider crashed into an asteroid, the other lost him in the chaos. Breathing hard, Daniel guided his ship out of the cluster. His hands were steady, but his mind was sharper than ever. He knew now that the closer he drew to the fortress, the greater the danger would be. Echoes of Home One Night. As his ship drifted silently in deep space, Daniel allowed himself a rare pause. He stared out at the endless stars, his thoughts returning to the Queen. He remembered her face in the Chamber of Stars, her voice heavy with sorrow, and the weight of her hope resting on his shoulders. But more than the Queen, he thought of the boy. He had seen the prince once, months earlier, during a training exercise at the palace. The child had laughed at Daniel's clumsy attempts to teach human games to the Zilari guards. His laughter had been bright, innocent, and full of life. That memory fueled Daniel's resolve. He would not let that light be extinguished. Closer to the truth. Finally, after weeks of searching, Daniel reached the coordinates given to him. In the distance, hidden within the shadows of a dead moon, he saw it, a fortress of black metal, bristling with turrets and guarded by patrol ships. Its design was unlike anything he had seen before, part station, part stronghold, and entirely built for secrecy. He studied it carefully from afar. The fortress was well defended. To attack it directly would be suicide. But Daniel had not come to attack. He had come to slip inside. Activating the cloaking field he had patched together from stolen parts, Daniel drifted his ship closer. His heart pounded, but his hands remained steady. Step by step, he drew near the place where he believed the prince was held. For the first time, he allowed himself to whisper aloud, "Hold on, kid, I'm coming." And thus the human soldier's search truly began. Alone in the dark reaches of space, with nothing but his courage and his cunning, Daniel Rhodes closed in on the fortress of the raiders. Ahead lay danger, betrayal, and trials that would test him beyond measure. But he pressed on, for a queen's hope, for a child's life, and for the belief that sometimes even one human could stand against the shadows of the galaxy. The black fortress hung in the shadows of a dead moon like a predator waiting in silence. No beacon marked its presence. Its walls were sharp, jagged, built for strength and fear rather than beauty. Patrol ships circled it in careful patterns, and every surface seemed armed with turrets ready to fire at the smallest threat. Captain Daniel Rhodes sat inside his small ship, watching the fortress through his scanner. His jaw tightened. This was no ordinary hideout. It was a prison, a marketplace of stolen lives, and perhaps the final cage of the young prince. Daniel leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes for a moment. "You're in there, kid," he whispered. "I'll get you out." Planning the impossible, he knew rushing in would mean death. The fortress was designed to destroy armies, let alone one lone human. But Daniel had not come this far by being reckless. He studied the patrol routes, watched how the ships circled the base, and waited until he saw the rhythm of their movements. Every fortress had weak points, not always in its walls, but in its people. Soldiers grew tired. Guards grew careless. Machines wore down. And in the smallest cracks, opportunities were born. Using the cloaking field he had pieced together from scavenged parts, Daniel drifted his ship closer. He shut down unnecessary systems to avoid detection. Finally, he reached a docking bay hidden on the lower side of the fortress, where old cargo haulers came and went. "This is it," Daniel murmured, tightening his gloves. He sealed his helmet, grabbed his survival pack, and slipped into the docking bay through an overlooked maintenance shaft. The walls were dark and cold, the air smelling of rust and oil. But he was inside. The shadowed corridors, the fortress corridors, stretched like veins through the massive structure. Dim red lights glowed, casting shadows across the metal walls. Daniel moved carefully, staying close to the dark edges, avoiding security cameras when possible. He passed rooms filled with crates, some marked with strange alien symbols. Others held cages, empty now but stained with the memory of fear. He forced himself to look away. His mission was clear: find the prince. At one point, footsteps echoed ahead. 2 guards in heavy armor marched by, speaking in a guttural language Daniel barely understood. He pressed himself against the shadows, holding his breath until they passed. His heart beat like a drum, but his steps remained steady. Deeper inside, Daniel pulled out a small scanner. He adjusted its settings, searching for signs of life. Among the thousands of signals, guards, workers, slaves, one stood out. Smaller, weaker, yet steady. The pattern matched the prince's life signature recorded in the palace archives. Daniel's eyes hardened. "Got you." The prince's cell. The signal led him down narrow stairwells and through twisting corridors until he reached a secure wing guarded by forced doors. Beyond the glowing barriers, Daniel saw cells built into the walls. Most were empty. A few held captives too weak to even lift their heads, and there, at the far end, inside a cell of energy bars, sat the boy. The young Prince of Zalar looked thinner, his robes torn, but his eyes still burned with quiet defiance. When he noticed Daniel, his face lit up with a mixture of shock and hope. "You," the boy whispered. "The human soldier," Daniel smiled faintly. "Yeah, it's me. I'm here to take you home." The boy stood quickly, gripping the energy bars. "I knew you would come. I told them. I told them you wouldn't leave me." Daniel's chest tightened. Even in fear, the boy had trusted him. That trust gave him strength. Breaking the cage, the cell was locked with a control panel guarded by alien codes. Daniel knelt beside it, pulling out his toolkit. He was no master hacker, but he knew machines had weaknesses. Wires could be rerouted, power could be cut, and locks could be forced. Working quickly, he pried open the panel. Sparks flickered as he crossed wires, rerouted circuits, and forced the system into a loop. The energy bars flickered once, twice, then dropped with a hiss. The boy rushed forward, throwing his arms around Daniel. "I knew it," he cried. "I knew you would find me." Daniel hugged him tightly but whispered, "We don't have much time. We need to move." The prince nodded, his small hands clutching Daniel's armor as the soldier lifted him into his arms. The alarm sounds. They had barely stepped out of the cell when a harsh siren wailed through the corridors. The lights turned from red to bright orange, flashing rapidly. Daniel cursed under his breath. His break-in had tripped the system. Heavy footsteps thundered in the halls. Voices shouted in alien tongues. Guards poured into the wing, their weapons raised. Daniel ducked into a side corridor, pressing the boy against his chest. "Hold tight," he commanded. The guards fired. energy bolts searing past his shoulder. Daniel fired back, each shot precise, dropping enemies one by one. He moved quickly, never staying in one place, turning every corner into a chance to escape. But the fortress was alive with sound now. Sirens echoed, doors locked, turrets shifted. The entire structure seemed to hunt him. The humans' ingenuity, Daniel knew he could not outfight them. He needed to outthink them. As he ran, he spotted a fuel line running along the corridor ceiling. Energy surged through it, powering half the wing. With one quick shot, he blasted it open. Fire and sparks exploded, filling the hallway with smoke. The guards stumbled, blinded by the flames. Daniel dashed past them, carrying the boy through the chaos. At another turn, he found a narrow maintenance tunnel too small for the armored guards to enter. He slipped inside, crawling quickly while the prince followed behind him. The tunnel stank of oil and dust, but it led them away from the main corridors. "Are you all right?" Daniel asked, glancing back. The boy nodded firmly, though his face was pale. "I'm not afraid." "Not with you," Daniel smiled faintly. "Good. Then let's keep moving." Cornered. After what felt like hours of running, Daniel emerged into a large chamber filled with machinery. Engines roared, pipes hissed, and platforms stretched across the room. He scanned for an exit, but before he could move, guards poured in from every side. Dozens of them, armored and armed. Daniel's pulse raced. He placed the boy behind a metal crate, whispering, "Stay low. Don't move." Then he stepped forward, his blaster in hand. The guards sneered, their weapons aimed. "You should have stayed in the shadows, human." One of them growled in broken basic. Daniel smirked. "Funny. The shadows are where I do my best work." And then he fired. Bolts of light cut across the chamber. Daniel weaved between platforms, using machinery as cover. His shot struck fuel canisters, sending bursts of fire into the air. Guards stumbled, blinded and panicked, while Daniel kept moving, never giving them a clear target. The boy watched, wide-eyed, as the human soldier fought like a storm. To the child, Daniel looked less like a fragile human and more like a force of nature. Escape to the docking bay. Finally, Daniel spotted the way out. A cargo lift leading down to the docking bays. He sprinted toward it, blasting controls behind him to slow pursuit. The boy clung to his side as they leapt onto the platform. With a flick of his wrist, Daniel activated the lift. It descended quickly, alarms blaring above. Guards shouted, but they were too late. The lift opened into the docking bay, a vast hangar filled with ships. Daniel scanned quickly. His own small vessel was hidden nearby, but between him and it stood more guards. "Almost there," he whispered. He sprinted, weaving through crates, firing shots to scatter the guards. The boy held tight, his small hands clutching Daniel's armor. Every step felt like a lifetime. At last, they reached the ship. Daniel slammed the hatch open, shoved the boy inside, and jumped in after him. The pursuit engines roared to life. The ship lifted off the hangar floor just as the fortress turrets opened fire. Blazing energy bolts lit the dark void. Daniel gritted his teeth, steering hard to avoid the blasts. "Hold on," he shouted. The ship shot out of the hangar, plunging into open space. But enemy fighters launched after them, fast and deadly. The boy cried out as the ship shuddered under enemy fire. Daniel's hands danced across the controls. He dove through asteroid fields, twisted through narrow gaps, and fired countermeasures to confuse their pursuers. The enemy ship stayed close, refusing to give up. Come on," Daniel muttered. He steered toward a dense cluster of rocks, using their shadows to mask his ship. The fighters followed recklessly. At the last moment, Daniel pulled a sharp turn, releasing a flare. The enemy sensors locked onto the flare instead of him, sending two ships crashing into the asteroids. The last fighter stayed close, firing relentlessly. Daniel spun, pulling a risky maneuver. His ship flipped, facing the fighter head-on. He fired once, twice, striking the enemy squarely. The fighter exploded in a burst of light. Silence filled the cockpit. The boy slowly looked up at Daniel, eyes wide with awe. You did it." "We escaped." Daniel allowed himself a small smile. "Not yet. But we've got a head start. That's all we need." A promise kept. The fortress grew smaller behind them, fading into the shadows of the dead moon. Ahead lay the stars, open and free. Daniel glanced at the boy who sat beside him now, still trembling but alive. "You're safe now?" Daniel said gently. The boy nodded, his voice soft but steady. I knew you would come, human soldier. I told myself, Daniel will not forget me. And you didn't. Daniel's chest tightened. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. I made a promise, and I don't break promises. The boy smiled faintly, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. Within moments, he drifted into sleep, his small form leaning against Daniel's side. As the ship sped into hyperspace, the journey back from the rift zone was long and dangerous. Daniel's ship was old and damaged from the escape, its hull scorched and its engines trembling with each jump through hyperspace. But inside the small cockpit, there was a peace Daniel had not felt in weeks. The boy, the young Prince of Zalar, was safe. He slept beside Daniel. Wrapped in a blanket Daniel had carried in his survival kit. His small breaths were steady, his face calm at last after days of fear. Daniel glanced at him often, not as a soldier guarding a mission, but as a man watching over a child who had placed his trust in him. Almost there, kid, Daniel whispered as the stars blurred outside. Your mother is waiting. The Queen's vigil back on Zalar Prime, the palace had grown heavy with silence. Queen Saralith still wore the crown, still sat upon the throne, but her spirit was tired. She spent hours each day in the Chamber of Stars, gazing at the map of the galaxy above her head. Her advisors urged her to move on. Your Majesty, one said carefully. Weeks have passed. No word has returned. We must accept the truth. But the Queen's eyes, sharp even in sorrow, silenced him. No, she said. I will not accept what my heart refuses to believe. My son is alive. I feel it. The council exchanged uneasy glances. To them, hope was foolish. To her, it was all she had left. Each night she stood alone in her private chambers looking out across the shining city. She remembered her son's laughter, his small hands pulling at her robes, his voice asking endless questions about the stars. Her chest ached with longing. She prayed silently, not to gods, but to fate itself. Bring him back. Please bring him back. A signal in the dark on the 20th day since Daniel had left, the palace comms officer burst into the throne room. His voice shook with urgency. Your Majesty. An incoming signal from outside the rift zone? The Queen rose from her throne, her heart racing. Show me. The great screen flickered to life. At first, only static filled the image. Then slowly the view cleared. It was Daniel's face. Tired, scarred, but alive. Your Majesty. His voice came through, rough with exhaustion but steady. I have him. Your son is safe. We are coming home. For the first time in many weeks, Queen Saralith's composure broke. Tears filled her eyes. Around her the court gasped, voices rising in shock and relief. The Queen pressed a hand to her lips, whispering, Thank the stars. The return. The day Daniel's ship descended through the skies of Zalar Prime, the entire capital gathered to see it. Streets filled with citizens, banners of silver and gold waved in the wind, and songs of hope rang through the air. The ship landed gently upon the palace platform. The ramp lowered with a hiss and silence fell over the crowd. From the shadows of the ship stepped Daniel, weary but unbroken. In his arms, wrapped in a blanket, he carried the young prince. The moment the boy saw his mother, he leapt from Daniel's arms and ran forward. Mother, he cried, his voice carrying through the air. The Queen fell to her knees, gathering her child into her embrace. She clung to him tightly, tears streaming down her face. My son, my precious son. The boy buried his face in her robes, trembling with joy. I knew you would wait for me. I told them you would never give up. The Queen held him closer, her heart overflowing with relief. For those few moments there was no throne, no empire, only a mother and her child, reunited at last. The court's reaction, when the Queen rose, she turned to Daniel. The entire court watched, waiting for her judgment. Daniel bowed low, his voice quiet. He is safe, Your Majesty. That was all that mattered. The Queen stepped forward. For the first time in the history of the Zalari throne, she bowed her head to a human. Gasps filled the hall. You have done what no other could, she said. You crossed the dark, faced the raiders, and returned my son to me. You have not only saved a prince, you have saved a mother's heart. The boy clung to Daniel's arm, his eyes shining. He is my second shield, the child declared proudly. No one will ever hurt me while he lives. The court stirred. Never before had an alien ruler shown such honor to a human. Many whispered in awe, others in disbelief, but none could deny the truth. Daniel had achieved the impossible. The celebration of stars. That night, the city of GalacticPrime erupted in celebration. Towers glowed with golden lights, music filled the air, and citizens danced in the streets. Fireworks rose above the skyline, bursting like flowers across the twin moons. Inside the palace, a grand feast was held. Long tables stretched across the hall, filled with foods from every corner of the empire. Nobles raised glasses in Daniel's honor, though many still looked at him with disbelief, as if they could not understand how a single human had succeeded where entire fleets had failed. The queen sat at the head of the table, her son beside her and Daniel at her other side. "Tell us," one noble demanded. "How did you do it, human? How did you defeat the raiders?" Daniel shook his head. "I didn't defeat them. I outsmarted them. Sometimes strength isn't enough. Sometimes you need patience and a little luck." The queen smiled faintly. "And courage," she added. "Do not forget that." The boy nodded eagerly. "He fought like a storm, mother. They tried to stop him, but he was faster, smarter. He carried me through fire and darkness. He never gave up." Laughter and cheers followed the child's words. For once, even the most doubtful nobles raised their glasses to Daniel. Quiet moments. Later that night, when the feast had ended and the halls had grown quiet, Daniel stood alone on a balcony overlooking the city. The stars glittered above, endless and bright. The queen joined him, her robes flowing in the soft night wind. She stood beside him in silence for a moment before speaking. "You have given me back my son," she said softly. "There are no words for such a gift." Daniel shook his head. "I only did what anyone should have done." "Do not diminish your deeds," she replied. "Thousands of warriors would not even try. You alone, human, dared what others feared. For that, you have my eternal gratitude." Daniel's gaze remained on the stars. "I didn't do it for reward. I did it because it was right." The queen studied him for a moment. Then she placed her hand gently on his shoulder. "That is why you succeeded. Not for glory, not for power, but for the simple truth of what is right." They stood in silence. Two figures from different worlds united by a bond forged in courage and hope. A hero of the empire. The next morning, the queen addressed her people from the steps of the palace. The plaza below was filled with citizens, their voices rising in cheers. "My people," the queen declared, her voice strong and clear. "We have seen a miracle. My son, our prince, has returned, and we owe this to one man, a human soldier, Captain Daniel Rhodes." She raised her hand toward Daniel, who stood quietly at her side. The crowd erupted in cheers, chanting his name. "From this day forward," the queen continued, "he shall be known as protector of the royal line, a title no alien has ever shared. His courage will be remembered for generations. And let all who hear this know humanity is not weak nor fragile. They are our allies and our friends." The boy raised Daniel's hand high, smiling proudly. "This is my second shield. He saved me." The crowd roared with joy, peace in his heart. That night, Daniel sat in his chamber, the noise of celebration still echoing faintly in the distance. He leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. For the first time in many weeks, he allowed himself to rest. The prince was safe. The queen was no longer grieving, and the galaxy, at least for this moment, felt a little brighter. He thought of Earth, of the simple life he had left behind. He thought of the boy's laughter, of the queen's tears of relief, of the people cheering his name. He had not sought glory, but it had found him. As he drifted into sleep, one thought stayed with him. Sometimes humanity's greatest strength was not in their bodies or their weapons, but in their hearts, the refusal to give up, even when the stars themselves seemed against them. Weeks had passed since the young prince had returned to his mother. The city of GalacticPrime sparkled with renewed energy. The streets, once quiet and solemn from mourning, now hummed with life. Markets overflowed with goods, children laughed beneath the golden towers, and the air was filled with music and the chatter of grateful citizens. Yet within the palace, the shadow of recent events still lingered. Queen Saralith often found herself glancing at the young prince, now healthy and full of energy, and recalling the terror of his disappearance. She could not forget the weeks of uncertainty, the nights when she wondered if she would ever see his face again. But alongside the shadow of fear now stood a new light, a human soldier, whose courage had restored her son and given hope to an entire empire. The honor of humanity, the queen summoned Daniel to the throne room once more. Though he had been honored before, this meeting was different. This time, the Queen spoke of legacy, of trust, and of a bond between their peoples that would last for generations. "Captain Daniel Rhodes," she began, her voice echoing through the great hall. "You have done more than return my son. You have shown what courage, patience, and heart can achieve. You have earned a place in history, not only as a protector of the royal line, but as a symbol of the strength of humanity." Daniel bowed low, uncomfortable with the attention. "I only did what I had to do, Your Majesty. That was all." "No," the Queen said firmly. "It was not merely duty. You risked everything, traveled through the most dangerous parts of the galaxy, and faced enemies no Zalari would dare approach alone. That takes more than duty. That takes a heart strong enough to stand against fear itself." The courtiers watched silently, some in awe, others quietly discussing what this meant for their empire. No alien had ever received such honor from the Queen. To Daniel it felt surreal, but he remained humble. Teaching the prince even after the celebration ended, Daniel spent time with the young prince. The boy was eager to learn more about the galaxy, about survival, and about the human way of thinking. He asked endless questions, each one a window into curiosity and courage. Daniel found himself smiling more often, teaching the boy not only skills for defense but lessons in strategy, patience, and compassion. "The galaxy is dangerous," Daniel said one afternoon, "but fear does not help you. Knowledge, preparation, and courage, those are what keep you alive." The boy listened intently, hanging on every word. "You are my second shield," he said. "I will never forget you." Daniel ruffled his hair, a rare gesture in his usually serious demeanor. "And you must never forget to be brave. Strength comes in many forms, not just in fighting. Sometimes courage is in standing up for what is right, even when others doubt you." A symbol. Across the stars, news of Daniel's heroism spread beyond SciFi-Prime. Across neighboring systems and even distant planets, stories were told of the human who dared the Rift Zone and returned the lost prince. The tale became a symbol, a reminder that even the smallest, seemingly weakest beings could achieve greatness with heart and determination. Ships arriving at SciFi-Prime now carried visitors who had heard of Daniel's deeds. Scientists, diplomats, and curious travelers came to witness the human who had captured the respect of an alien queen. And Daniel, ever humble, greeted them simply, explaining what he had done and why it mattered. "It was not about glory," he would say. "It was about doing what is right. That is all any of us can do." The young prince, growing older by the day, repeated the story to all who would listen. His friends, tutors, and visiting dignitaries learned the tale of the human soldier, who became more than a protector. He became a hero, whose courage changed the fate of an empire. Strength of friendship. Over time, the bond between Daniel and the royal family deepened. The Queen, once distant and formal, began to treat him as a trusted advisor and friend. He often dined with the family, sharing stories of human culture, Earth, and the simplicity of life far from war and politics. The young prince, inspired by Daniel's courage, began to train in both Zalari traditions and human tactics. The lessons were not just about survival, they were about understanding others, thinking creatively, and making decisions with compassion. One evening, as the three of them walked across the palace gardens beneath the twin moons, the prince turned to Daniel. "Will you always be my second shield?" he asked. Daniel looked down at the boy, his eyes soft. "As long as I live, I will always be there when you need me. But remember this, you must also be your own shield. Courage and wisdom are yours to carry too." The boy nodded, understanding the lesson. Though small, he felt stronger knowing that Daniel's example was with him. Challenges ahead. Even as peace returned to SciFi-Prime, Daniel knew that the galaxy remained full of dangers. Raiders, pirates, and political rivals still lurked in distant sectors. But the story of his rescue had inspired a new sense of hope among the Zalari people. They began to believe that even in the darkest hours, courage and clever thinking could triumph over overwhelming odds. Daniel spent weeks helping fortify the capital's defenses, advising on strategy and training select squads in unconventional methods. He was a human, yes, and physically weaker than the Zalari, but his mind and heart gave him an advantage others often overlooked. Strength alone is not enough, Daniel reminded them constantly. Adapt, think, and act with heart. That is how the impossible becomes possible. The young prince often observed these lessons, learning not just how to fight, but how to lead. Daniel's influence would shape the boy into a ruler wise beyond his years. The Queen's gratitude one day. As Daniel reviewed a map of nearby star systems with the Queen, she looked at him with an expression he had not seen before, pure admiration. "You have changed the course of this empire," she said softly. "Not through conquest, but through heart, courage, and loyalty. I owe you more than words can express." Daniel shook his head. "You only gave me a task, Your Majesty. I only did what was needed. Your son was the priority." "Perhaps," the Queen replied, "but what you have done goes beyond that. You have taught all of us what it means to act with honor, even when the odds are against us. That is a lesson no one will forget." Daniel nodded silently, grateful for her words. Though he never sought recognition, her appreciation felt like the warm light of a sunrise after weeks of darkness. A legacy begins. Years passed, and the young prince grew stronger, wiser, and courageous. He trained alongside his people and learned from Daniel, who remained a constant figure in his life. Together they explored new worlds, strengthened alliances, and safeguarded the empire. Daniel's name became legendary. Across the galaxy, children told the story of the human soldier who braved the Rift Zone and returned a lost prince. His deeds inspired humans and aliens alike. More than weapons or armies, Daniel had shown that courage, intelligence, and heart could overcome any challenge. The human soldier had not only returned a child, he had changed the course of history, leaving a legacy that would endure for generations. The final reflection on a quiet night. Daniel stood alone on a balcony overlooking SCIFI-HFY. The city shimmered with light, and the stars stretched endlessly above. He thought of Earth, of the people he had left behind, and of the journey that had begun so far from home. He had risked everything. He had faced impossible odds. And yet, through patience, courage, and resolve, he had succeeded. The young prince now ruled with wisdom and bravery, guided by the lessons Daniel had taught him. The Queen, once heavy with sorrow, now ruled with joy and hope restored. And humanity, through the courage of one soldier, had earned a place in the hearts of an alien empire. Daniel smiled softly. Sometimes, he whispered to the stars, all it takes is one person to make a difference. One person willing to believe, willing to act, willing to keep a promise. That is all anyone ever needs. And so the human soldier who had crossed the galaxy to rescue a child became more than a hero. He became a legend. A protector, a teacher, and a symbol of hope for all, proving that humanity's greatest strength was not in weapons, wealth, or numbers, but in heart, courage, and the refusal to give up no matter the odds. The story of Captain Daniel Rhodes would live forever, not just in the memory of the Zalari, but in the stars themselves, shining as a beacon of hope and inspiration for generations to come.